Recently, we've ended up in something of a Rumiko Takahashi renaissance. We had, not that long ago, the first season of the remake of Ranma and a Half, with the second season on the way as of this recording. But before that, we had a brand new adaptation of Takahashi's probably first really big long running gag manga, Urusei Yatsura. Urusei Yatsura has a pretty simple premise that sets up its comedy and gets out of the way right away, nice and quick. Ataru Moriboshi is a obnoxious, womanizing high school student. A race of aliens that are sort of but not quite like Oni come to Earth and threaten to take over unless we win at a game of Oni tag, where the person who is it has to grab the person who they're chasing by their Oni horns. And the person who Ataru is up against, having been chosen as Earth champion, is the leader's beautiful daughter, Lum. Ataru wins through shenanigans, probably sexual harassing shenanigans, and also, due to an added comedic misunderstanding, Lum decides that Ataru is in love with her, and so she starts attending his high school. Hilarity ensues. Other aliens arrive over the course of the series with wacky pseudo harem hijinks spitting out of this. I say pseudo because generally Lum is like the only girl actually romantically interested in Ataru, while Ataru and the other male characters will basically chase after any pretty face. This leads to the core of the comedy of the show. As with It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and probably also, Konosuba, everyone here is kind of an asshole. Their assholishness will vary from story to story, but Ataru is always going to chase after other women, while still being protective and jealous of his relationship with Lum. Lum will be very clingy to Ataru, zapping him with electricity if he's even looking at other women, whether or not it's one that he's actually romantically or sexually attracted to at the time. It does have some character shift in time. Ataru eventually actually feels romantic feelings for Lum, even if he can never quite spit it out. Ataru's love interest in the first episode, Shinobu eventually ditches him for someone else and generally becomes one of the show's few responsible, air quotes, straight women. However, without using the explicit term, Rumiko Takahashi has stated the past that she's a firm believer in the moonlighting rule, that a romance story loses romantic tension when the characters admit their feelings for each other, and thus her stories tend to bend over backwards, this would be no exception, to keep that from actually happening. This makes the show something of an acquired taste. If you want something from before the moe boom, an adaptation of arguably one of the key shows of the sort of shoujo aesthetic with wild, wacky slapstick antics, but once it also doesn't get too much into like really skeevy fan service, this show is for you. However, if you like your characters more, likable, then this show will take some work to get into. All that said, the series does take something of the Dragon Ball Kai approach. A lot of what can be considered filler from the original series in the 80s has been excised, and probably some of the humor that's aged badly has been adjusted as well. For example, the character of Rinosuke Fujinami, a girl who was raised as a guy and whose deadbeat father repeatedly misgenders her, feels like a character where the original iteration could have aged like milk. Now, I'm cisgendered, but I have noticed from friends who are and were watching the show that this version of the character was not someone who bounced them out of the show, which admittedly, that's faint praise, but it's significant and bears mentioning, especially considering that back in the day, I've encountered more than a few people who were trans who, let's just say, their eggshells started to crack a little bit when they had their first encounters with Rama Saotome. Now, that said, this isn't exactly a show that could really have quote-unquote filler anyway. Each episode is 2 stories, each running about 15 minutes or so, with the status quo generally resetting at the end of each story. Now, new characters are introduced that will sometimes come back later, and sometimes characters bring up actions from previous stories, but if somebody accidentally blows up a building in one story, if the principal accidentally gets maimed in some sort of wacky hijinks, the building or the principal will be fine in the next. I shouldn't have to explain this to you. You've watched Family Guy, you've watched The Simpsons, you are familiar with the concept of the animated wacky sitcom. This falls very much in that same category. And consequently, like, even if a story is ostensibly filler, either in this or the original series, it's not really filler because, honestly, it's a story that's funny or supposed to be funny. And just as often in The Simpsons and Family Guy or that sort of thing, you'll have characters who will go out of character over the course of a story for the sake of comedy. And like, this probably happens a bit here too, but that's a situation where it's something with Rumiko Takahashi and her writing as much as it is with anything original that's created for this story, for this series. In all, the new Urusei Yatsura series is, in some respects, the best introduction to the franchise. Something to watch. I'd even recommend watching it before going back to the original. Not because the old animation doesn't hold up, but more, it gives you a lot of the all of the characters that you will come to know and love over the course of this franchise. It gives you the structure of the two plot individual stories per episode, and lets you not have to worry so much about running into a joke that worked well in the 80s, but is very dated, 45 years later or so. And so it's fun, it's funny, and it's really worth your time. Animation style is great. David Productions did an excellent job on the show. And then, if you dug this and find saying, I want to spend more time with these characters, there is the original series and the films and OVAs to go back to and see these characters from this earlier adaptation, to see adaptations of stories that they didn't fit into the new adaptation, or stories that were anime original from directors like Mamoru Oshii working on the original series. Now, the new Urusei Yatsura series is currently available for streaming on High Dive and also received physical releases from Sentai Filmworks. Affiliate links to where you can pick up the show on physical media can be found in the show notes. Buying anything through those links, of course, helps support the show, keeps things running in terms of bandwidth costs and all that other wonderful stuff.
Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.